Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking your Friday afternoon today to be here with us today in our last session of Research Edge for the first half of this year. We will resume back Research Edge after today's session in fall 2021. So today we have another interesting presentation. So we have two external presentations who's going to be sharing their research projects with all of you. So today's project that is going to be discussed by two speakers, Dr. Ancilleno Davis and Mr. Guberman. Both of them are from the IsraAID WASH. WASH is the Water, Sanitation and Hygiene program that has been in place after Hurricane Dorian happened in Grand Bahama and Abaco. So I think today's session is going to be another interesting session to see how this has impacted the groundwater in this island and how we can benefit from this research and how UB can be involved in this collaboration. So this session today will give you a good overview of what this project is all about. And if you are keen to work with them in future projects, please do ask your questions. All your mics are muted currently, except for both the speakers. You can raise your hands and I can unmute you later at the end of the presentation, or you can continuously post your question in the chat box. The recording will be done for this session. So at the end of the day, if you want to review the presentation, not a problem at all. We will ensure that each one of you gets a copy of the presentation. So for today's session, we actually had more than 50 over people who have registered. Some of them say they want to listen to the presentation later. So I'm not sure how many exactly is going to sign in at the session today, but many will be listening like in the past in our recorded sessions. So without further ado, let me hand over the session to both Dr. Leno and Gail Guberman to take over the presentation. You can share your screen for your presentation today. Okay.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Ancilleno Davis, and I'm joined by Gil Guberman today, our program manager. I'm the WASH program coordinator, and we will be presenting to you today on sustainable groundwater management in the Bahamas with some references to the impacts of Hurricane Dorian. Thank you again for joining us.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. And yes, thank you also from my end. So first of all, to start with, who is IsraAID? I don't know how many of you have actually heard about the organization. It's an international NGO. It was founded in 2001, and it's based in Tel Aviv, Israel. And over the past 20 years, IsraAID has worked in over 50 countries responding to emergencies, but also implementing long-term interventions, such as this WASH project in the Bahamas. Currently, IsraAID is active in 12 countries around the globe, and it has 6 WASH projects, again, including the one in the Bahamas. And most recently, it's responded to the volcanic eruption in St. Vincent, as well as a severe outbreak of COVID-19 in Eswatini in Africa. So regarding the emergency response to the Bahamas, IsraAID basically arrived immediately following Hurricane Dorian, a couple of days afterwards, on September 5th. And the team launched a very quick needs assessment to identify the areas of intervention. And in collaboration with its local partners in the Bahamas, the team focused on 3 main sectors of work. One is relief item distribution. The other was psychosocial support. And the third is related to water, sanitation, and hygiene. About a month later, a slightly more thorough needs assessment was carried out in October, and this was in partnership with Israel's Hydrological Services, with the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the government of Bahamas. And together they brought in Israel's chief hydrologists to carry out field surveys on the two islands, on Grand Bahama and on Abaco. And the objective of this was basically to assess the water sources after Dorian and to provide recommendations for a long-term water management strategy. So the current WASH program being implemented basically stems from the observations and the recommendations of that assessment. So although I assume most of you are aware, I would like to first explain what was the main impact of Hurricane Dorian on the groundwater. We're not talking about, of course, the infrastructure into people's lives, but specifically to groundwater. On the left, you can see basically the route that the hurricane took, and on its way, just about on September 2nd, it kind of stalled right there between the two islands. And what happened was, with the strong winds and shallow water banks, this brought in a very, very severe and abnormal storm surge that flooded the land surface. We're talking about up to 70% of the land being covered with seawater. In some places, several yards, or let's say six to 8 feet deep. And with that seawater just sitting there, it basically infiltrated into the porous limestone that makes up the two islands, which ultimately leads to salinization of the freshwater lenses and to the water no longer being potable. So at the moment, here in the Bahamas, IsraAID has two projects. One is a community center in 8 Mile Rock on Grand Bahama, which focuses more on the protection sector, and it also serves as a hurricane shelter for the upcoming hurricane season, well, for future hurricane seasons. And the other is the WASH project, which this presentation is about. So let's talk about sustainable groundwater management. That's the title of this of our WASH project. And our project's partners are basically the two water authorities, the Water and Sewerage Corporation, which is the governmental water authority acting on most of the islands in the Bahamas, the populated islands, and then the Grand Bahama Utility Company on Grand Bahama. And the donor, the funding for this project comes from the United Methodist Church, UMCOR. Okay, so this project is a 1-year, 12-month project, and it started with the first phase was a hydrogeological survey. Hydrogeological being a groundwater survey. This started around November of last year. It was a very intensive field survey that lasted several months, during which myself and the previous WASH program coordinator, basically we mapped the primary well fields on both Grand Bahama and Abaco. We pinned the locations of pump stations and wells using GPS, and where possible, we measured the water quality. This would have been conductivity, pH, temperature, and salinity, and TDS, which can be calculated from those. And we did that using YSI handheld devices. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with them. But basically handheld devices where you can go to the individual wells and drop the sensors into the water and get those measurements. We also measured the static water level using water level meters. And all of the data that we collected, we uploaded to an open source platform called MWater, which I highly urge you to look into, to explore. We can share the link to it afterwards. It even has a very user-friendly app. But what was the main purpose of this hydrogeological survey? It was basically to gain a better understanding of the groundwater situation post-Dorian. And for us in our project, this helped us to assess the most impacted water lenses and to ultimately decide where and how we wanted to construct a groundwater monitoring system for the water authorities. So here in the photos, you can see these are just examples from the field work. On the left, holding a GPS device, and then of course using the different handheld devices to measure the water quality and water levels. On the next slide, this is still part of the hydrogeological survey. These are images that were taken directly from the mWater app, and they show all the data points that we logged. Most of them represent individual pumping wells in the well field. And there are a few interesting observations here. If we look on the right, on the map of Grand Bahama, we see that there are 4 primary well fields, W1, W3, W4, and W6. And those are the well fields that supply water to Freeport and to the surrounding towns. And you can see that they're quite proximal to the city of Freeport. Now, the largest well field is W6, the one that's slightly further out. It's actually very close to the UB campus in Freeport. Before Dorian, that well field supplied 60% of the fresh water to Freeport in good quality most of the time. However, it was also the well field that was most impacted by the storm surge during the hurricane. And today it still has extremely high salinity levels, way beyond drinking water. And these high levels of salinity have very serious impacts. First of all, it impacts household infrastructure, such as pipes and washing machines and dishwashers. But it also has impacts on nature, on the pine forests, on the ecosystems. Those pine forests used to cover the entire region of W6. Now there's nothing, or at least not pine forests. If we look on the left, we see a map of Abaco. And here we can see that there are 7 main well fields, but they're dispersed all across the island from the very north to the very south. And here we can also make a few observations. First of all, the large distances between the well fields. This makes the overall water management quite challenging in terms of logistics. Also, we can see that certain well fields are located on quite thin sections of the island, meaning that they're near or closer to the sea. This means that the lens is less thick and more vulnerable to saltwater intrusion. So the next phase of the project was to start constructing a groundwater monitoring network. And the first part of that was drilling observation wells. So just want to distinguish the difference between an observation well and a production well. Observation wells are basically wells that are static wells. There's no water is being extracted. Instead, they can be used to monitor the groundwater quality. And we drilled 8 wells on each island. So, for example, on Abaco, we drilled 1 well in each primary well field, and then 2 in Marsh Harbor, which is the largest well field. And we also constructed 2 sentinel wells. Sentinel wells is what we call them. They're essentially deeper wells, all right? These are wells that go past the freshwater lens into the brackish zone. And the idea of that is to kind of track longer term changes that are most likely related to the rise of sea level and climate change. All right. So once we have the wells drilled, then we need to install sensors into these wells, because a well without a sensor is just a open borehole. So what we did is we basically installed a groundwater monitoring sensor in each of the 16 observation wells. The sensors sit, if you look at the left image, you can see that the sensors sit, this is just a visualization, at the bottom of the well, and they're surrounded and protected by screened PVC casing. Now, the sensors can be programmed either in the office or in the field. You can see the third image from the left. You can see that this is a sensor connected to a laptop, and it's a pretty simple programming procedure. And once you program it, you can decide how often you want it to measure. But what is it measuring? So in terms of chemical parameters, it's measuring temperature, conductivity, and salinity, because that's what's most interesting to us, that's the biggest problem at the moment with the groundwater. But of course, you could have sensors that measure different contaminants. In terms of physical parameters, it's also measuring the static water level. In other words, the depth of the water column above the sensor. Now, in addition to these sensors, we also, in most of the wells, we also installed very high-tech telemetry devices. I'm not sure how many people here are familiar with telemetry, but basically, if you look at the second image from the left, you can see that on the left, it says a level sender. And this sits at above the water inside the well. The well, if you look on the right, the very right image, you can see one of the staff members from Water and Sewage holding these level senders. So you can see that is exactly where it's placed, at the very top of the well, several feet above the ground. Now, equipped with a SIM card, these devices are connected on one end to the submerged sensors, and on the other end, they have an antenna that transmits data directly to the user using communication towers, the same way that you would use your cell phone. And this allows the water authorities to get real-time data straight to their computer, no matter if they're sitting at their office in Freeport or Marsh Harbor, or sitting on a beach in Tel Aviv sipping a cocktail. They get that straight to their email, and they can see that data. And that is a huge advantage. The next phase of the project was water management training. This was designated basically for the staff members of the two water authorities. And it included representatives from several Bahamian islands, not just Grand Bahama and Abaco, but also from New Providence, Andros, and Eleuthera. Now, you see that we had both a theoretical part of the training, but also a practical part. The list of topics that you see here, that was part of the theoretical training. And I would just like to say that all of the presentations, all of the PowerPoint presentations, as well as the recordings of these modules are available to anybody who is interested. Please just reach out to us. At the end, we have our contact details, and we are more than willing to share those. And I would like also to say that the water management training was given by our team's two consultants from Wellspring Water Solutions, Philippe Martin and Anne Murray, who are really an essential part of our team. All right, Lino, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And now we've been talking about sustainable groundwater management, and it is a huge topic, but essentially it means meeting the needs for water in our community now without damaging the water source or the infrastructure. And in the short term, we need to basically meet the demand. Think of cleaning, cooking, drinking water, and hygiene needs. In Abaco and Grand Bahama, we've had restaurants, schools, hospitals, and dental offices that were closed at certain times because they did not have clean water, or they did not have any water, running water to deliver their services. But we do not just want to deliver the water, we want to deliver clean, safe water. And we have to meet a standard. The Water and Sewerage Corporation and Grand Bahama Utility Company, they work to meet World Health Organization standards. And because they're using this system of wells and pumps to extract the groundwater and deliver it to customers, we want to also assess those well fields and the pumping systems make sure they're running efficiently, and we want to try to avoid pumping salt water through them because that can really damage the infrastructure, and that then causes more downtime and less delivery of the water to the customers. So these short-term goals of meeting the demands now, achieving international standards, improving efficiency, and assessing the system, they feed into long-term goals, which also include improving efficiency and delivering on future demand. But there's also this element of planning, maintenance, and developing resiliency in the overall system. Just as a little bit of a background and to catch up those who are maybe not familiar with how groundwater works in the Bahamas, this is a standardized image of a freshwater lens and how the water enters and leaves the system. In the Bahamas, we do not have any mountains. We don't have rivers and streams that are feeding our groundwater. Instead, we get all of our fresh water or fresh groundwater from the rain. And so the rain will fall to the ground, and either it runs off away from the freshwater lens, or it percolates down into the ground through the porous limestone rock that we have. And once it's in the ground, that fresh water actually floats on top of the salt water layers. So we have a brackish water layer that's in between salt and fresh, and then we have seawater that's actually below all of this, and all the fresh water floats on top of that. Now, as the rainwater falls down and fills these lenses, we also have losses from the lens, which can include regular evaporation if you have an open area like a blue hole, or you have plants that are actively drawing water up from the ground. But today, we're specifically talking about how we use the groundwater and how we can use it sustainably. So we have to talk about how we're pumping the water out of that freshwater lens. Groundwater in the Bahamas is not distributed in these perfect bowl-shaped lenses like we saw on the previous slide. Instead, it's distributed throughout the islands in these really organically shaped freshwater lenses and aquifers. This map shows us where the freshwater is very prevalent, where there's a lot of freshwater by the blue highlighted areas. And we can also see some areas where there's more scarce water or lower quality water. And the red hash marked areas are areas where water is very scarce. So we would need to pump the water from the areas with lots of fresh water and deliver it to the areas with less water or lower quality water. And this image is for Grand Bahama Island, but we can look here at Abaco Island. And again, Abaco Island has lots of fresh water distributed throughout the length of the island, but there are areas where water is scarce. And on the right-hand side of this slide, there are the white arrows that are highlighting where the different monitoring wells were installed. And you can see that they're distributed up through the island, but some parts of the island are very narrow, where they're closer to the saltwater influence from the ocean on either side, whereas other parts are pretty wide, and so they're a little bit more buffered.
Lino, if you would allow me to interrupt for one moment. Maybe I missed it, but I think one important thing to note here is that these maps by the U.S. Army Corps, this is from a report in 2004. So this is way before several of the large hurricanes, but also Hurricane Dorian. So of course we have to take into account that the shape of the lens and the abundance of the fresh water changes over time, and it can change quite significantly, as we have witnessed by Hurricane Dorian.
And that I was about to mention that on this slide, but thank you, Gil. And so this slide shows three other Bahamian islands. We have here Long Island, Eleuthera, and Andros. And these islands, you can see that the distribution of the fresh water is very different as well. And on Andros in particular, you can see that big patch of bright blue where there's lots of fresh water, but most of the island actually does not have available freshwater resources. Although Andros Island is famous for having all the great blue holes and the freshwater resources, it's not necessarily distributed where people are living or need to use it. And then when you look at Long Island and Eleuthera, these islands have very little available groundwater resources. But like Gil said, these islands, the distribution of the water on these islands can also be changed due to development, major storm impacts, saltwater intrusion, and although that freshwater lands might be very large, but if you dig a marina into the side of it, that could then change the whole system into a saltwater area. And this slide shows you some of how that can impact our distribution of water and our drilling. On this slide, we're showing you that the freshwater lenses, they're not just this big cavern under the ground with water sitting in it. It's actually limestone rock that's porous and the water slowly filters through it. When you have this type of system, the salt water that is coming from the edges of the island all around the Bahamas, the fresh water is floating on top of that. And the way that floats, the center of the freshwater lens can be much thicker and deeper than the edges of the freshwater lens. And so if you have a well, like the one on the right, that's close to that edge, when you start pumping water out of the freshwater lens, you can actually pull in the salt water from the edges, and that causes lateral intrusion or intrusion, saltwater intrusion into your freshwater lens. And it's the same situation with a lens that might be in a deeper area, a well that's in a deeper area of the lens. But if you drill deep enough, you can still come close to that brackish water layer, that brackish zone, and the saltwater zone, and pull salt water up into the lens, or just pump pure salt water through your system. And so our work is assessing this water and determining what type of water we have. And this gets back to the water quality that we are analyzing with these devices and transmitting back to the Water and Sewerage Corporation or Grand Bahama Utility Company staff, who will then be able to determine the best choices for their system. This table shows you drinking water, fresh water, brackish, and seawater. And these, I want to point out to you that these numbers are based on environmental measurements. And these environmental measurements are averages or ranges of what naturally occurs. So drinking water that a person would normally drink actually lies within the freshwater area. So if someone tastes water, they can taste anything that's up to, once you get to 0.5 parts per thousand of salinity, you can taste that. And you're not going to really be interested in drinking water that's more salty than that. With electrical conductivity, this is very closely tied to total dissolved solids. And that 200 to 800 electrical conductivity for drinking water, and the total dissolved solids going from less than 300 up to 1200, that's where you can actually taste the difference in the water. And they actually did research through the World Health Organization for what type of water people would drink. And people actually don't like water that has nothing in it. So that's why it starts at 200 and it doesn't go down to 0, because it tastes so bland, so insipid that no one wants to drink it. But then above 1200, you can taste so much in it that it's not water anymore. It's not drinking water. But with our monitoring devices, we're thinking, where is fresh water? Where is the brackish water? And when are we in seawater? And here you can see some of the values and ranges. So fresh water actually goes up to 1,000 microsiemens per centimeter in electrical conductivity. And that's actually pretty high, but it's still considered fresh water environmentally speaking. And then you have the brackish zone, any amount of salt that's really easy to detect but still below salt water, that will have a different transition level between that and the salt water. But once you hit 46,000, that's really hardcore salt water that we would avoid having. So now I guess this is the part that all the scientists in here were waiting for, and all the University of the Bahamas students who are so eager to get into the data. This sensor is at Treasure Key. It's one of our Sentinel wells, and like Gil said, this is one of the deeper wells. And this sensor is actually sitting in a brackish water transition zone, and it's cycling within the higher range of salinity. So you can see the red line at the very top of the chart is what we consider seawater. And on the right-hand side, that water level in meters, that's actually absolute pressure. So that includes about 10 meters of pressure that's the atmospheric pressure. And so you take that away, and then with the remaining 21 meters, it's about 70 feet in an 80-foot well. On the left-hand side, the conductivity in microsiemens, that's the blue line, where the water level is the yellow line. Note the difference in the water level is less than about 0.5 meter in change, but the conductivity in that change over time goes from about 40,000 to 44,000 microsiemens per centimeter. So when we look at this change and we look at how those waves are synchronized, we can make a note of the time. And every day there are 2 high tides, 2 low tides. But when we think about people actually going to work for the water authorities, they're only working within a 9-hour period. And so really they would only catch one of these peaks. And we need to understand that having a monitoring device in the well that's collecting this data all day and then transmitting it regularly, this means that you don't have to commit a staff member to going out there and everything that's included with packing the truck, driving the truck, the fuel, the time for them to go out there, download the data, get it back to the office, and or collect the water sample and take it back to the lab and analyze it and all this stuff. So we're getting this data. But for me, as an environmental scientist, it's very interesting to see how this salinity is so well paired with our water level changes. And like I said, this is a deep well, and this sensor is actually in the saltwater zone. But if we look at this well, you can see the conductivity on the left is not 40,000, but it's around 4,000. So this is much, much less salty water, but it's still very tightly paired with the water levels in that well. And so this is exciting for us to be able to see that the water levels tie so closely with the salinity and the water quality that if the water authorities wanted to time their pumping, they could time it so that they only draw water when it's the freshest possible water. But also we can use statistical analysis to eliminate that variation in the level of the water, the tidal effects. We can find out if there's some change in salinity that's actually caused by something different, like a storm, like Hurricane Dorian, or maybe someone did a development nearby and broke the fresh water lens. We can actually see this as a change in these graphs that we're getting regularly. And because you're getting it so much more quickly then collecting one sample and taking it back, you don't miss these maybe stochastic events that just pop up. And also you can better narrow down when the impact happened so that you can relate it to other things that are happening in the environment. Just to make sure that everyone can see how closely it relates and how easy it is to regulate and predict based on these tidal fluctuations. This is about 3 weeks or 2 weeks of tidal fluctuations in the Bahamas. And it's just really hard for us to find tidal data for the Bahamas. But it's every day. There are 2 peaks, 2 valleys, and it's just so consistent and regular. It would be really easy to pull this data out and use that to make our correlations and our analyses. And so again, as a scientist, I'm always geeking out about the data, but definitely if anyone would like to talk about how this can be used or how you can find this type of data, I'm definitely open to that as well. And Gil, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Ancilleno. And yeah, I'll just stress again, relating to those fluctuations is that, first of all, we haven't had the sensors installed for very long. They've only been in there for a couple of months. So we only have a couple of months of data, and we're definitely looking forward to seeing how let's hopefully not any major storms, but how storms to a certain level may affect the water levels and the water quality. So we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on that. So lastly, what is the added value of having a groundwater monitoring network? How does this help the water authorities? Obviously, it can help them to meet water demands. It can help them to supply safe and reliable drinking water. It can help prevent any type of saltwater intrusion from overpumping. So that kind of ties into what Dr. Davis was saying earlier about overpumping. We would see that as some kind of anomaly in the data. We could then the authorities could then make a decision that they reduce the pumping in one part of the aquifer and maybe increase it in a different part. Of course, this will also help us or help them evaluate the long-term sustainability of the aquifers if they see that the thickness of the lens is slowly diminishing, for example. It can assess impacts of future storms on the aquifers. This is definitely something that we're very interested in seeing down the line. And essentially, this will increase the resilience and allow the water authorities to make more sustainable decisions, both during the dry season and during the storm season. So one last component of our project, which is not directly tied to the sustainable groundwater management, is community outreach. And that is something that is equally important. We are trying to engage with the communities on Grand Bahama and Abaco, but also in the entire Bahamas, to raise awareness on various topics. It can be water related. Most of them are wash related. So it could be water scarcity, how to conserve water, water footprint, environmental topics. And one example is also rainwater harvesting. This is something that in the next couple of months, although our project does end in September, we do hope to hold some kind of a webinar on reintroducing rainwater harvesting as a technique that can be used either for emergency times or perhaps even as a main source of drinking water. Just imagine having harvesting enough rainwater during wet season and treating it and having one tap connected to your house, and that's enough. You don't need to go and buy bottled water from the supermarket. You don't need to go fill up your water at different distribution stations. This is something, it's a pretty basic technique that I think several generations back, almost everybody practiced here in the Bahamas. And then also at the end of this month, we're going to be holding a emergency preparedness webinar related to or going into the hurricane season. And we will be bringing guest lectures, some of them from the University of the Bahamas, but also from the government. So please tune in. We will be promoting it on our social media, and we can definitely also pass that through the university connections. All right, and so please well, this is being recorded, so I guess you don't need to take a screenshot, but you have our contact information here. And again, you can follow us on social media to hear more about any upcoming events or presentations that we have. And once again, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found it interesting. And I guess we have some time for questions.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis and Jill, for a really an interesting work that you're doing here. So I'm going to open the floor for questions. You have two options to put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hands and I can unmute you. So there are a few questions already in the chat. First one here is on the tidal station. Where is this tidal station?
So the tidal station, the tidal data, I inferred the tidal data from, there's some tidal data from South Florida that I use, and I just like shifted it over for us. But you can find them on the NOAA website, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration from the US.
Okay.
They have tidal area, tidal data locations in South Florida. There were some in the past in the Bahamas, but they are no longer in use.
Another question here from Dr. Curling. How important is quality groundwater for most purposes, seeing that we have reverse osmosis?
So one of the things that will always come up in the Bahamas is that we don't create much of our energy and our energy resources. So the fuel for the bunker C diesel generators and our electricity is very unstable in the Bahamas. So if you're relying on electricity to generate your water through reverse osmosis, that becomes problematic, especially as we saw during the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian on Abaco and Grand Bahama. Not only were the water facilities damaged, but also the electricity facilities were damaged. So on the one hand, that means that we could not pump the water. And then if we were also needing reverse osmosis, we would not be able to pump and treat the water. And even if you're using reverse osmosis, if you have good, clean groundwater, you have to work much less intensely to get that to the level that you want it. So all of this comes back to the higher quality groundwater we have and the better we protect it in the first place, the less work and the less cost it will have for us to get it and deliver it to our people that need it.
All right, so can I hand over to Dr. Chavez? You have a question, I see your hands up.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Nair, Gil, and Dr. Davis for this fantastic initiative. I think it's a tremendous push toward sustainable water, groundwater management in the Bahamas. And I would say even more in the Caribbean as well, because we have very similar karst environments around the Caribbean. And of course, the results that you're obtaining there will be definitely very useful for other islands. My question has to do with our recent disasters, such as Dorian, say, over Grand Bahama. And as of course, you well know that The salinity of particularly well field 6 in Freeport was tremendously affected, and other aquifer systems or other well fields such as W3 and W4 to the west were less affected. Probably, my hypothesis would be that, the elevation would be a little above, the 5-meter level, so they were more or less protected against the storm surges that salinized the eastern well field 6. So my question has to do about vulnerability of aquifer systems and well fields of Grand Bahama and other islands, particularly looking at the elevation as a vulnerability criterion. And secondly, how so far in your work, in your monitoring, in your training, are you obtaining from the water users and managers a good response as far as applying those methods, data, and technologies to their day-to-day work? Thank you.
So
Right.
maybe I can talk about the elevation issue, and Gil can take over on the enthusiastic response of our water authority related to participation in this work. So definitely in the Bahamas, we have an issue with a real lack of elevation. So although you might say there's a difference in the impact because of the elevation, once you get to an 8-foot storm surge, it doesn't matter where you are in the Bahamas, unless you specifically on Mount Alvernia and Cat Island, you're not gonna really escape the impacts of that. A big part of it is really having intact environments. So mangrove habitats, coral reefs that would prevent this major storm surge in some areas. That's important to have at least to a certain extent that can protect us. And then having the intact forest and the native forest that can then take or handle some of that salt water, that's the next level of defense for us. And ultimately, also there are some things that we can do to protect the way we interact with the groundwater. So in the Bahamas, pretty much anyone can pay a guy a couple $100 and they'll come and drill a well in your yard. So that lack of regulation, we're just punching a bunch of holes into the freshwater lens. So that puts us at risk. And those are all locations that salt water that's flushing over the island can now enter. Dredging, digging marinas, big trenches and stuff, if that's not regulated, that can also impact the freshwater lens as well. So there's a lot of management aspects that we have to deal with, along with understanding how this elevation, habitat differences, and environmental issues make our freshwater lens more vulnerable or can be used to protect it. So kind of that's a more broad answer, but it includes taking into consideration the elevation on our islands.
Yeah, and I think that the elevation is, from our work with at least with the Grand Bahama Utility Company, they, after Dorian, when they went to do some groundwater exploration, they were definitely exploring more of the higher elevation parts of the island. Not all of them were successful in finding good quality water, but that is definitely something to take into account. Regarding the enthusiasm or the willingness of our partners, of the water authorities to actually start using this infrastructure, well, we are still, I think that time will tell. So maybe in 1 year we will have a better answer. But for now, they have definitely embraced it. I mean, we saw this in the water management training, the online and the field training. A lot of curiosity, a lot of interest, really wanting to get to understand all the details, how to use the sensors, how to maintain them. how to analyze data. We are also now, together with our consultant, who I mentioned earlier, working on a database for both of the water authorities to be able to insert the data and to generate graphs that they can then analyze and use again to make sustainable decisions on how to manage their water. So we're doing our utmost to give them all the tools to be able to maintain and to keep using this and to keep building the database. And I also very much hope that they will understand that there's this understanding that data sharing is really crucial. That the data that you gather doesn't stay just with you, but it's shared for the benefit of everybody, because at the end, everybody should be working together for these causes.
Yeah, I think just one last thing that I'd like to touch on with regard to that and that enthusiasm. When we were delivering the online training and the in-person training, we had people from at least 5 different islands in the Bahamas. And each of them, they brought to the conversation, oh, this is what the water and the well fields look like on my island. And we talked about the traditional Bahamian beliefs, oh, if you want to get rid of something, just chuck it in a blue hole. Like the blue hole is just this magical portal to nowhere where you can throw away waste. But we talked about why that is not true and how that affects groundwater and how all the groundwater is connected. Although a blue hole might look like it's one self-confined or contained area, that water actually percolates all under the island, and how you're sharing that waste with everyone who has a well, in a 100-mile radius. And so I think it was really cool to see the lights come on for some of them, but also when they were able to teach us about, oh no, this is how our well system is set up, and this is what happens after it rains like this, or when there's a big storm. And you can see that they're really tied to their islands, and they understand how a lot of this works intuitively, but giving them the understanding and the behind the scenes of the environmental and hydrogeological issues was really cool for me. And they definitely came with a lot of enthusiasm that they took with them.
Yeah. Okay, so before I go to Dr. Michael White, can I just ask Ann Alvarez a question? What is the groundwater quality in Grand Bahama? The water in some areas still has a different smell and taste and seem to be affecting person's skin and hair.
I don't think we can comment on what the effects are on the skin and hair, but definitely you can reach out to your water authority on whichever island you're on, Water and Sewerage Corporation throughout the Bahamas, or Grand Bahama Utility Company in Grand Bahama, and they actually do water quality testing. So they can collect water from your property, take it back and see what all is in there. But like I said, these impacts from Hurricane Dorian, when you consider all of the water that was impacted, and these are wells, it's not like you can just slide the well around in the ground and move it to someplace else super easily. This is probably going to take years for us to, one, understand what happened to the groundwater, two, adjust the infrastructure so that we can get the best water possible and or deliver it to the clients in the best way. But there's also going to be impacts at every part of that delivery line. So it's not just the water company, it's not just the groundwater. Also, you need to start assessing your property, your equipment and your pump, your water heater, the tanks that are related to them that have had this salt water or this contaminated water in them for a while. That also is going to be creating issues that even if the water company resolves their issues and it still is delivering it through your damaged or dirty pipes, that becomes an issue as well. And this is a long-term effect on the Bahamas and our economy right now.
Yeah, I'll just add, as someone who's been living on Grand Bahama and Freeport for the past 8 months, which is not very much compared to the other Bahamians, but working closely also with GBUC and understanding the water quality in the different well fields. As I mentioned, W6, the major well field, it does not. It's no longer supplying 60% just because of the poor water quality, but it is still has a lot of infrastructure that's already there, and it is still supplying a lot of water. I personally live in the area of Bukaya, and I'm receiving water from Wellfield 6, and yes, the water is definitely of poorer quality than water that comes maybe from Wellfield 3 or 4 in Bohemia, in the neighborhoods of Bohemia. So, that's as Dr. Davis said, it's not something that you can snap your fingers and solve. Nature has to take its course, and it could take many years. And so the water authorities, they're not magicians, but they are doing their best to improve the quality. And I don't know if you're aware, but they are also in the process of constructing an RO system, a mobile RO system in W6, which will, when it is completed, I cannot give you an exact timeline here, but when it is completed, then the water quality will definitely improve a lot. But then again, as Dr. Davis said, things like bad odor, that's usually from organic material accumulating in the pipes. It's not coming from the pump stations. It's not coming from the well fields. It's not from the groundwater. It's actually stuff that accumulates more locally at the household level or the neighborhood level. So a lot of these things need to be either replaced or at least assessed. So yeah, on Grand Bahama, they have not yet reached 100% drinkable water. Definitely not. But it is improving, and we have a wet season ahead of us, and we can pray for a lot of rain and hope that will also improve the water quality.
Yes. Dr. Michael White?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. And thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I am from the School of Education of the University of Bahamas, and my focus is science education. And so I'm very delighted to hear what you are sharing today. And I actually teach a course where we look at water sustainability. So this is truly wonderful, and I'm very excited. I have just a question to ask. I may not have heard everything, but what are your plans in terms of sustainability with reaching the high school students? My task is the training of science teachers, and we're always looking for, innovative ways for us to have sustainable practices. Have you had any outreach to high school students? Or primary school students?
I'll let Dr. Davis respond because he's definitely had a lot, but I will say that one of our first community outreach initiatives here on Grand Bahama was with some of the eco schools. And we kind of focused at that time more on plastic bottle reuse or plastic pollution, which is of course tied into the fact that, without reliable drinking water, people are buying bottled water, and it's creating a lot of waste, and there's not really there's no recycling infrastructure here in the Bahamas, so everything ends up in a landfill or even worse. So that was one of the initiatives that we had with schools. But of course, we would be more than happy to expand to other activities, and I guess Dr. Davis, you might have some things to say about that from your own experience.
And so I'd like to remind you that IsraAID in the Bahamas came as part of a humanitarian mission in response to Hurricane Dorian. And so it's definitely an emergency response type event. But the training that we're delivering to the water authorities and those slides and presentations, those are actually freely available to anyone in the Bahamas who would like to use them. So again, reach out to us and we can deliver those to you so that you can access them and share them with your students as you see fit. Also in the Bahamas, there are lots of environmental organizations that are doing a really good job with science education. including Bahamas Reef Environment Educational Foundation. On Grand Bahama, you have Waterkeepers Bahamas, who is actually going out and actively measuring water quality throughout the island of Grand Bahama regularly. And they have a really amazing setup over there. You have the Bahamas National Trust, who is more concerned with the protection of the national parks, but they have some parks like the Andros West Side National Park that has the highest concentration of blue holes in the Western Hemisphere. So when you think about it, there's lots of content out there, and you can encourage your students to join Beings on Facebook. That's Bahamians Educated in Natural and Geospatial Sciences. And there's about 1,400 members on there now, but we share lots of different activities, opportunities, job postings, and the students can really get engaged in the environmental science community. And definitely reach out to us if you'd like us to deliver a virtual or in-person interaction with your students to get them to see. I think it's really important for our Bahamian students to see that, oh, you mean a Bahamian could actually be a scientist? And so a lot of them really get a kick out of that, seeing a Bahamian like myself come into the classroom or to meet with them and speak with them. So definitely reach out and we can talk about what that would look like and how we can interact with your students.
Well, as I close, I just want to say that I am actually part of the Bahamas Association of Secondary Science Educators base. And so I'm putting you on notice now to be love if you come and speak to a large group of science teachers. And because, you know, if the teachers get it, then they're going to share it with the students. And so I'm really excited about that. So please look out to hear from us. We would love you to present at, we have a monthly meeting. And so I'm going to let the president know, and so that you can present to that large group of science teachers. Because I think they need to hear this. They need to hear this and really infuse this whole notion. As I heard you talk about the blue holes and about the damage we're doing with, you know, people just, you know, punching holes in the ground, you know, creating their own wells wherever. You know, we need to get this out to as many people as possible so that we can really look at our very limited freshwater supplies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Micklewhite. And I'd like to say also, in addition to our contact information that's on the screen here, if you can spell my name correctly, which it was spelled correctly on all of the material for this presentation, you can find me, and I'm always willing to help with science education in the Bahamas from a personal level.
Thank you so much, Dr. Micklewhite. There's another question here from Anne. Have you been able to get data on the impact of previous hurricanes on the water tables? Matthew was just 2 years before Dorian.
So when I first arrived, when this project just began, we went into finding existing data. That was our main goal, and that was a huge challenge. Actually, a lot of the data apparently, a lot of the few data that existed, some of it even got lost in the hurricane, fortunately, in Hurricane Dorian. But from speaking with the field technicians, the field operators that work for the water authorities, our understanding was that yes, of course, that they did notice that there was an increase in salinity after Hurricane Matthew, for example. However, the storm surge during Hurricane Matthew was not near as substantial as it was from Dorian. And so while the salinity levels increased, they also decreased quite quickly, even within a one wet season, one summer, 1 or 2 summers. So the levels were nowhere near what they witnessed after Dorian.
I think one really cool product of having this technological intervention where you have a device that's collecting the data instantly and emailing it out, you have this digital repository of data that you can actually have dispersed in different ways, where you can have it emailed to a person on Abaco while it also goes to the head office in New Providence at the same time. And this makes it so much quicker for people to respond to, but also you have that redundancy or that resilience in the data collection and data management. And this is something that we talk about as scientists, as utility or service management. You want to have this data that you can look back, and that's really important to be able to say, oh, when this hurricane came through, this is what happened. It was this powerful and it lasted this long. But this hurricane, it was a shorter time, but more intense. And over time, you can get more of that data together and understand the effects even better. And I guess I might also be just a data geek, but I think that's a really cool opportunity that we have now with this, this type of technology.
Thank you so much. So that will conclude our Research Edge session for the spring and also in fact summer session today. Thank you to both Dr. Davis and Jill for really doing an excellent presentation today, which has really given us a lot of insight of some of the work that you're doing, some of the important work that you're doing. We really do hope everyone have benefited from the session, and we'll take the opportunity to reach out to both of them if you need help, if you want them to come into your sessions, or if you want them to talk to you or to any of your colleagues or students, please feel free to contact them directly, or you can even contact through the university. So thank you for taking your afternoon today to be here. Thank you both Dr. Davis and Jill for taking your time to be here with us today. We hope the University of the Bahamas will continue to collaborate, find other ways of collaboration. We already started initiating the talks, and we do hope more things to come in the future. So until we see you again in the fall semester, so signing off for the Research Edge, and stay in touch, and please wait for our next set of flyers that is coming out for the fall semester. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.